going to take a quick second to introduce the folks from Autodesk. Those of you who had a chance to go to the conference in Las Vegas when I presented in October, one of the thing that I presented during what we call my power hour was the concept of information as a service. And there's a couple presentations about that on the Ed Services track. And one of those will be by the folks at Autodesk, and then the other is SAP. The Autodesk approach is not monetized, meaning you all can go in and have at it, whereas the SAP approach is monetized. So you get one of each, and you can kind of cross-compare in terms of what approach might be of interest to you. But I truly think that it is information as a service. It's not education, it's information. Because people want it when they want it, at the time that they want it, how they want it, etc. And so the other piece of that as well is that content, information, knowledge, whatever you want to call it, is everywhere. So why not leverage it from all sources? You know, the thing that is really very apparent is that a content development organization doesn't scale. So if that's where you're getting your content, that's a going out of business strategy, because you cannot possibly produce courses, content fast enough. It can't be done. So you have to start leveraging the crowd. You have to go internal. Your support folks have a ton of information. Your product management folks, your marketing folks. So it's really the convergence of all of those pieces of information and providing a vehicle for your customers to have easy access. And so Autodesk is going to talk about their journey, and I think I first, because Michael Minson, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I first talked to him like 2 years ago. So I know they've been working on it for a while. So we have Eric Stover and Tom Williams, who are kind of the two masterminds behind all of this. And so they're going to talk about how they got where they are today. And Tom, I think you are presenting,
Yep.
correct? So welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Priya.
Thanks for that great introduction. That introduction was great. I think it's nice to know that I'm pretty much on target with what you should be expecting from my talk. I'm a director in a team at Autodesk called the Autodesk Knowledge Network. And I thought you might have been wondering what that was, but now I think you have at least a good introductory idea. But you can follow us on Facebook. But first, very briefly, something about Autodesk. Many of you may know of us, but we are one of the largest software companies in the world. But the flagship product, AutoCAD, that's been out there for 30 years, is one of the products that most people know the name of. Some of our other products are used for designing buildings or designing any sort of manufactured object. But what they all have in common is they're very deep, complex software tools for designing something or creating it virtually or simulating it or understanding what it's going to be like to create that thing in the real world. And the corporate motto is that we help people imagine, design, and create a better world. But in our team, we really focus on that word help, because our focus really is how can we scale the business by supporting the learning, adoption, use, troubleshooting, any sort of help-related scenario that a customer runs into on a massive scale on the internet via self-service access to information. And our team was essentially created out of a recognition that that help means more than just providing the customer a really powerful, complex tool. It means explaining how it actually works and how to use it. So I'm hoping that, you know, some of you, I'm probably going to go very quickly through this, but some of the things that, because from what Maria said, it sounds like you all have similar interests. But some of the things we were trying to solve were that we have customers and employees sharing information all over the place. We have multiple channels that we want to deliver that information to. And what we see is that the rate of change of our technologies is actually accelerating. They're becoming more complex. There's more things going on all the time. So we ended up with an extreme need to be able to scale getting that information out to the web. And what I started down this path about 4 years ago because I specifically noticed that I was tired of moving the support knowledge base from one CMS to another, and I didn't think we wanted to do it again. I thought there must be a better approach. So some specific challenges and opportunities. This is how our customers used to learn our software, kind of in the old days. You could go take a on-site training course. Well, you still can. But we would ship out a shelf full of manuals, or you could go buy books and so forth. But nowadays, of course, all that information is on the web, but unfortunately it's in a lot of different places. And we as a company have many different teams building a lot of different web presences. But where that information is actually ironically least available is often in the product where the user's trying to get something done. And there's something very important about that product context I'm going to mention again in a second. We also had a lot of inconsistent delivery mechanisms. If you're looking at it from a delivery or measurement standpoint, we had the product teams creating what they called online help in one place with one set of localization strategy. We had a customer-facing web team that created the support website. We had, and still have, our forums on Lithium, so that community was present in different locations. And at the time anyway, our Salesforce.com instance wasn't connected to any of this in terms of any customer-facing web. So those are a couple of the challenges. Now I want to mention a couple of the specific opportunities that we saw that we wanted to leverage. One of the things that's really interesting, when you imagine the user using our software, they actually do talk about navigating the ribbon. It's a very complex set of tools. And the specific product they're using, the language that the user interface is in, the release, even the specific location within the toolbar or the feature that they're using is essentially a context where they're trying to get work done. And one of the things we're trying to leverage is that total set of information that's relevant to them at that time is actually a fairly narrow piece of information. Just like if you were to search for a coffee shop on your phone right now, you'd only want and expect to see a very narrow list of coffee shops. But similarly, out of the millions of documents that we have, there's really only a few that are relevant to any one specific tool within some of these products. So we can actually potentially leverage that user context and the fact that we are the provider of that context to deliver something that's a much more rich information asset than what they might just find on the web as an anonymous visitor. And then there's another opportunity that we're trying to exploit, which is the fact that we have a very well-established global ecosystem. At times it's been called a virtual corporation in a way. We have, not only we have 7,000 employees globally, but we have thousands of resellers who have many people who are dedicated to nothing more than understanding how our products work technically and communicating that to customers. There are thousands of training centers. There's a global student community with an expert program where there's students at different universities that are known as an expert in our software. And if you imagine even some of our major accounts, the typical pattern if they've got, say, 50 architects is that one or two of those people would be the local Revit expert. They'd be the go-to guy or woman who knows how our software works and is trying to help the rest of their peers use that. So one of the opportunities we're trying to figure out how to leverage is how do we leverage that relationship and all of those people with all that distributed subject matter expertise. Because for one thing, the people who created the tools aren't necessarily the ones that understand how to use it the best. So we named our team the Knowledge Network, the Autodesk Knowledge Network, and the concept is similar to knowledge management, but beyond just the bounds of any one single enterprise. We want to embrace all of that content that's out there and be able to source information from a bunch of different sources and leverage as many different sources of contribution as possible. So just a little bit conceptually about the strategy. One part certainly is that there's no one single CMS. We're trying to take all of the information that's out there in many of the web destinations that we own and also some that other people own, and be able to aggregate and standardize that content. It takes a certain amount of abstraction and standardization to be able to deliver it in a consistent fashion. And I'll talk more about that. And then we want to design for multi-channel delivery. we actually want to deliver that sort of information or knowledge in our Autodesk products at many times, but we also have a number of different websites and increasingly software as a service applications. And at times, we're going to want to deliver some of this information via mobile apps as well. Another part of the strategy is to try to create ways that we drive and accelerate the community contribution from all of that virtual network that I was talking about. In some cases, like on the left I've mentioned Autodesk Screencast, I'll show you very quickly a screenshot of anyway, where we're creating tools that make it easier for customers to capture and share some kind of rich knowledge asset. In other cases, we're actually leveraging third parties. We're working, I don't know, CAD Learning is one of the companies that has online learning about our software out in the industry, but lynda.com is another. And so we're leveraging partnerships with them to get some amount of free content, but also make for opportunities for them to be able to offer their services to our customers as well. And then we have some community programs focused on trying to drive accepted solutions in the discussion forums and recognize those people that contribute the most. So overall, when you think about this strategy, the core sort of knowledge as a service engine in the middle ends up needing to have a job, since we're trying to enable browsing, searching, viewing that content, but not just that. We would also want to consistently be able to measure the usage of that content. You need essentially a set of middleware that's able to aggregate that content, do a certain amount of analysis, indexing for search, automatic classification, enrich some of the metadata, and we're increasingly going down the path of even translating the content as well. In the process, we do qualify some of it, so we have a number of different filters where we decide what actually either isn't findable or is extremely obscure in the overall ecosystem. So I'm going to talk through some of the specific pieces of the solution. I didn't get very technical. I'm hoping that's okay, but I do have a diagram at the end of the slide deck. But specifically, all of the development that our team has done has been running on the Amazon cloud. It's largely based on a Java-based framework, but we're typically leveraging a lot of different open source components. There's a lot of material out there from which to assemble the kinds of web services that we need. The core search engine is Solar, and I'll mention that later in the deck. But when I say web services, in particular, I do literally mean delivering data over the wire. JSON and XML delivered as web services over HTTP. Part of what's compelling about that is that regardless of what happens with some of the different in-product features or different websites or different mobile apps that people might want to create, the fact that we're providing data and it's normalized and clean and well-structured means that this overall strategy is essentially future-proof. I've had different consumers within the company come on board and sometimes get outbid, but the strategy remains the same. So we've called this sort of middleware tier knowledge as a service. I think it's probably actually more precise to call it information as a service because it really takes a human being to have knowledge. But in our case, we have everything from our desktop and software as a service products where users are accessing and need to access information, to a number of different Autodesk websites, to, in some cases, some in-product features. So we knew that we wanted to be able to offer the Autodesk Knowledge Network as, in one case, with a presentation layer that was an in-product viewer that offered up an aggregated, filtered view of the overall ecosystem. In another case where we launched a website back in February that creates another rich access point for getting to this overall ecosystem. And then we do offer it as web services because there are cases where our product teams are developing something that we couldn't possibly. So we've made those all of the information available as RESTful web services. But the knowledge as a service tier in all of this provides for 4 key pieces. One piece is certainly discovery of that content. I've treated search and faceted navigation, or the provision of individual kinds of feeds about what the most liked content or the most recent content in a particular topic is, as one part of the strategy. But we've actually also been syndicating the content, providing the full content document, if you will, page as data in the cloud that we can aggregate into different web experiences as well. Essentially creating the possibility of kind of white boxing that content, if you will. It's not an easy strategy because the web is relatively unstructured in a lot of cases, but it's been an important part of our delivery, and I'll show you a couple of examples. Certainly we want the feedback mechanisms across all of this to be consistent as well. And then equally important, there's a framework and a set of tools that are part of managing this overall thing that include a taxonomy database, some content guidelines and tagging standards. To give you some idea of the individual sources of material that we're incorporating, certainly our product teams develop a huge amount of help documentation, and I'll talk more about that in a couple of subsequent slides. And we have the support knowledge base that comes from Salesforce articles. We have a number of different ways that tutorials and learning materials are provided from within the company. We have a couple of third-party sources coming online. We have Lithium as our forums. And then in particular, YouTube and blogs are an interesting example where the company literally has dozens. In fact, with blogs, I think it's more like scores of YouTube channels and blogs where the product management, the technical support people, the global workforce is providing a lot of information about our products online. And all of that's available via the YouTube APIs to be extracted for this kind of use. And we can embed the videos. So a little bit about the content first, though. I mean, the biggest single content source out of all of this, our product teams have a huge machine for creating what used to be those books on the bookshelf. They author literally around 250 to 300,000 pages of content in English each year, and then we translate that in 5 to 14 languages. And increasingly, we're trying to shift that culture. That could be a whole talk on its own, but we're trying to shift that culture about how they author that content to be much more web-focused. In particular, the things that matter to me the most in terms of delivering this knowledge network are that we're trying to shift that thinking away from kind of deep hierarchical book-oriented structures to topic-based authoring, which is a fairly industry-standard term. But we also sometimes use the term atomization or chunking. When you think about the user arriving at a piece of information, whether it's through our search engine or Google, that page is the first thing they land on. It needs to stand alone. The title needs to make sense. It needs to make sense in Google, and it needs to be able to be something that they can just consume and move on and get back to work. Part of what this also means is that the content becomes a set of well-formed blocks, ideally, that you could assemble something longer, a more complex workflow or a tutorial by bringing together these modular bits of content. We have driven some meta tagging standards that help us make sure that that content is truly search ready, because we provide more than just keyword search. And we're trying to drive towards a very simple and constrained set of the Ditto standard. I don't know how many people know or have worked with Ditto. Okay. It's an interesting example of an XML standard that kind of ran away with itself in some ways, and by driving towards a very simple version of that, we're able to provide a much more efficient kind of content transformation pipeline for the web. But then also in terms of the way that they write, we're trying to drive people to keep it light and do it right. There's many cases where they have a tendency to create really big, complex documents, but really, as you probably all know, the attention span on the web or on a mobile application is very short. We want high-quality, simple, and helpful content that speaks directly to the customer. We want them to think about mobile access and in some ways design for that first. And we want to get rid of a lot of really over-designed and complex craft that they've built up over the years. So one part of that pipeline, I mentioned the volume of that content. We do, most of that content, the Ditto-based content, is authored in a CMS from a CMS from SDL called Trisoft. And that is intertwined with our world server for localization. So that's an extremely flexible and powerful pipeline that we didn't want to disrupt, we wanted to leverage. But the ways that that content used to get to the web really frankly harkened back to the 90s until about a year ago. So what we did is, there's a transformation toolkit called the Ditto Open Toolkit that we set up on Amazon Web Servers, and we automated the flow of that content so that they can push a button in Trisoft and update their content on the web. On a local staging server, they can do it as a daily automated build, and to get it out to the web, they have a simple push button process. So the fact that we're running this on some fairly large Amazon servers and on more than one of them at any given time means that we can tell them to be continually updating their content, keeping it fresh, and we can handle almost any volume that comes through. And then we actually persist the data on the cloud and make it available in very web-ready formats that can be brought into an Ajax application or any web application that we choose to build. I did also add here that we are also extracting our articles out of Salesforce. Because we're delivering a lot of these user interfaces in fairly highly trafficked public contexts, we're not necessarily going to send the users to Salesforce. So we are extracting, we have an automated feed hourly to pull out all of our most recent and updated Salesforce articles and make those available. Now, yeah?
What if your articles are not in SFTC, it's some other legacy data store?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the same process could apply. Essentially,
They might not be up to your XML standard.
True, it's possible. In some ways, the kinds of standards we're trying to drive towards are fairly simple in certain cases. But what we have seen is that some of the content sources, if they were, there were some sources that we've got that have some fairly convoluted HTML, and that's where we've seen the biggest mess. So frankly, during the indexing and parsing, we have had to build some interesting filters to try to correct. One of the biggest challenges, frankly, is links. That we have had to build some filtering and cleanup into the process where we've got a fairly flexible way to use rules to establish correcting links and cleaning up some of the HTML. But there's no question it could be difficult depending on the source. For some of the other sources that we have, though, we are directly crawling them on the web. So typically pulling out a fairly short list of fields. Probably one of the things I could have put in the appendix is we really have essentially 10 or 20 or 30 fields that really, really matter to our overall approach here. And so we've tried to keep that data store fairly simple and create the body as one giant blob, but there's a fairly simple set of fields that really matter, which I think is also kind of part of the answer to your question. But when we do extract the data, we're typically only picking out certain fields and doing selective extraction of the content to try to extract that which truly should inform the search relevance. A lot of times in some of the web pages or websites that we have, that we know that for a fact that a number of the pieces of information are actually pointers off to other information, which when you think about it is actually going to be exactly contrary to getting the user to the right document when they're searching. So we typically are using very selective extraction. We're using a certain amount of intelligence about some of the hidden metadata fields to create new fields in the search engine that we can put some weight on. We are doing things with document IDs and so forth to handle what is duplicate content in some cases. For instance, we have in our overall store multiple releases of some of the documentation. So we're using some of the Solar features to intelligently handle those duplicates. But really important for getting the user to the right information, we weight that content according to the source that it comes from, and as well as we are able to provide across, or for each source, we're able to weight different fields differently in terms of providing the search. As part of our, yeah.
Just real quick, do you use that weighting just for search result relevance, or also to do the conflict management of user generated?
A little bit of both. Since the conflict resolution, are you talking about the duplicates, you mean?
No, where you sort of have the same problem answered contrary ways, I guess.
Yeah.
Hard, right?
I don't know that I have an easy answer for that one, to be honest. But when we boost things based on things like user feedback and how many times it was liked or how many kudos the accepted solution gave, we have a tendency to get the most.
So where you have control over that, you know whether they're really an expert, you can weight it that way versus just scraping the site.
To some degree, yeah. We've thought about ideas of weighting it based on who authored it too, but that starts to get pretty complex. I'm trying to keep it simple and then iterate. In the middle of our pipeline, we're using text analytics to extract entities or named known terms out of the content. This is an example, a screenshot from one of the tools where this is based on, this shows dimensions of our taxonomy data that we maintain. And this shows that the text analytics are recognizing, in this case, actually, one of our Expert Elite community program members, a specific acronym that means a particular release of our software, some of the commands, and the name of that software. So if you imagine us crawling the dozens of YouTube channels, we need to be able to extract structured data that helps us understand which products the videos are referring to, and oftentimes the product teams don't refer to them in the same way. They have some euphemisms and similar terminology.
You keep saying we, like how many people do you have on your team? Are you technical or marketing or one person?
So I think there's a two-part answer to that, and I told Eric I expected that one.
You can pay me later.
So the honest truth is well, so there's a two-part answer. I started this 4 years ago, which seems like an awfully long time now in a way. But for most of the history of this core knowledge as a service, it was literally one architect, myself, and 1 to 2 developers, and then eventually we were able to hire QA. So we did deliberately start with a very small, purposefully hand-picked, very small group of really strong people. I've now, the overall Autodesk Knowledge Network, everything in that diagram that I had that had the big gray rectangle in the background. In the last, since we first met Maria, the team's expanded to about 27, but they're delivering everything from the development of that screencast technology to the website to, well, I'll show you.
Are you going to talk about how you commercialize it?
We haven't. We're basically envisioning that our mission within the company is to support the rest of the business. That the more people can use our software, the better, and that's really our mission. We're not trying to monetize it. Pardon?
A 27-person investment to go make that happen.
At the moment, yeah.
How did you convince management to grow to 27 people?
Boy, that's an interesting one. I think.
That's the 4 years he mentioned.
That's the 4 years.
Well. Where's the bar? I think there's multiple answers to that. I do think that there is a recognized understanding that we as a company, we're 7,000 people, which is not that big, but the reach of the company is even much bigger than that. But what's happened is that we have become very reliant from the beginning on a reseller channel, and we didn't communicate that well to our customers. I frankly think, the big picture diagnosis behind, ignore all the technology, is that we've not been that good at communicating about how our products are used and what they do and what they're for. And I do think that you're probably familiar with the phrase consumption economics. As we as a company are shifting more and more and more to software as a service, more and more of a direct relationship to our customers, and more, if they don't keep using it, we're not going to keep getting paid. I think there is a collective corporate recognition that we do have to change how we explain how our software can be used and what it's for, and help people use it. I think there's also some recognition that some of these strategies are going to be a more beneficial investment than some of the alternatives. There was a time 4 or 5 years ago when we probably had twice as many people authoring that product documentation in provisions, for instance.
Did any of their, like, I would imagine, you've been around for 30 years, you say, were there like natural, like a tendency for like groups to say kind of, this is I'm product documentation and I'm not gonna do this stuff, or, how did you break down those barriers? Or do you still have them?
I would say we still have some of them, and I was laughing because I think the answer is partially stubbornness and partially, there's certainly been some level of executive mandate. Let me get to one slide, and I hope I remember to come back to that. So I'm going to probably, how am I doing on time? Maybe I'll go a little bit faster through some of these, though, because I think there's some interesting tie-ins to some of the things people have asked. It's actually been embedded in the products now for 4 releases. So I was providing originally a search engine. And if you imagine trying to get this adopted within the company, one of the things they said was, well, great, we'll use it so long as it's better than the Google search that we just implemented. I did mention our core search technology is actually Solar Cloud. So when we did that, at first I was like, no way. I mean, that's not really fair exactly, is it? But they had implemented Google Site Search in their in-product help, or in their online version of the product help. And we did a side-by-side blind comparison. The UI was literally identical. We had a set of test cases that were based on some QA test plans, as well as some real-world top most frequent searches. And I found the experts in the company that I could find to test the 2 side-by-side, and consistently beat out the Google Site Search that they had implemented. It was a higher rate, or lower rate of failure in cases where they didn't get any relevant results at all, and a higher rate of overall returning relevant results. And when you think about it, I mean, at first, I think to some degree Google's blinded everybody into thinking that all search is the same. When you think about it, we know something about the product. We know that the line command is different than the command line. We also have all of those hidden fields of data that we can weight, and we know quite a bit about how the content was likely created. So we did have some advantages and some ability to tune, really to optimize for some of the terminology. But I didn't tune for these specific test cases. I didn't game this. This is an interesting example, a current example of what I was talking about in terms of white boxing the content or serving it to the web in different formats for different presentations. This is one of our recent Heartbleed fixes that came out as an article out of Salesforce. Within an hour it was on the website, but it was also in the in-product help. This is actually a view of the overall ecosystem that appears in an embedded browser inside AutoCAD. So any user searching for that information in the in-product help would have found that as well. And certainly, this is something that's probably one of the biggest pieces we're still driving towards, is providing some of the overall feedback loops to try to drive the best content to the top. But we've implemented pieces of these. It's just not consistent throughout everything that we're doing yet. This is the screencast utility, or actually this is the output of the screencast utility that I was talking about. A lot of times you can imagine there's hundreds of YouTube or thousands of YouTube videos out there where somebody's showing how to use our product, and you kind of look at it and go, what did he click on? Wait, what was that? But this utility has a transcript. It's actually instrumented by the product teams to send data to the recording utility, so that you can mouse over any one of these and see a transcript of the specific features of the product that the user was using. Now, it will actually record anything on your on your desktop. I don't think we've had any Minecraft screencasts yet, have we?
Not just yet.
But I'm sure my son will do one soon. And I did provide the link here, by the way. So this is going to be available, we're renaming it, but it is available as a free utility. And we're expecting to expand that quite a bit when we launch it with the new name.
Yeah, beyond Autodesk products. We'll have an API. Others can use this application as well. So we've got plans of expansion coming later this year.
Eric's the product manager.
I'm the product manager.
And there's another piece that, entirely setting aside technologies. If you can imagine going to a potluck dinner party and the host tells you they're not only going to keep the leftovers, but they're going to keep the containers that they brought the food in, that you brought the food in. That's a little bit how we used to treat our community. We had different terms and conditions on our community websites that said, we will now own your content, anything you submit. So with our programs with the Autodesk Knowledge Network, we turned that on its head and essentially open sourced all of our content and said that anything that users submit is going to be open source as well. And that really makes it a lot more inviting for the community to create screencasts and share them. It makes it a lot more inviting for the community to participate in the discussion forums. If you're not familiar with Creative Commons, it's essentially an open source license for creative assets of any sort. So we think it's pretty important. And where it ties directly to our business is, imagine that this guy is a professor at a university where they wanted to be able to reuse some Autodesk materials but translate them into French. And our rights that we had previously put on the content actually precluded that. So how silly is that from a business perspective? If our money is made off of our software and the productivity and the value people are able to derive from it, why would we lock down the content and people's ability to take it, mix it, reuse it, and turn it into something that we couldn't ourselves create? So I did want you to know it's not just slideware. We have launched a number of different things, especially over the last year or so. We're now up to about 4 million visits a month. The search engine as a whole has about 5 million content items in 15 languages. And this gives you an idea of some of the most, even though the Salesforce articles are less than 10,000, it's obviously one of the most critical things that customers are looking for. So the numbers don't necessarily reflect value exactly. But our data content transformation really went live for this product here, and we transformed about 1.1 million pages that are now online. So this is the website. We launched this in February, and that's been developed in the last, say, year and a half, replaced the original support part of the Autodesk.com website. And it's a fully responsive site. This is actually the view that you see if you come to it on a phone. It's got a tablet view, and then that's the full browser view. So far, it's only in English, but certainly that's one of the key questions that's being asked of us. Is it was replacing an English-only website, but now how fast can we roll it out in up to 10 languages? But what we do have available in 15 languages is the in-product help. This is a very lightweight HTML, CSS, JavaScript viewer. Imagine that this, what I'm calling a viewer, shipped as the online help system for all of our products in all languages this past March. And yet, all of the development was really done by one developer who's a contractor in South America. It's all HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Behind it are those web services that I was talking about. And it's been thoroughly beat on by our product teams. But it really was pretty easy from a resource perspective to put this together. And the fact that we're serving the content the way it is, the pages are typically sub-second response times, very fast to render, and it's embedded in many of the products in an in-product window, and other products link out to it in a standard browser. We're experimenting with some alternate UIs for offering different paths to information and providing an ability for users to explore from one topic to another. But inside it, we're essentially serving up those same atoms of content in a different presentation layer. We also have some product teams, like this is Autodesk Inventor, which is designed for mechanical design. And this year, the product team wanted to offer search results directly in their product. It actually combines, at the top, there's, I know it's small, so sorry about that, but at the top, there's actually a search of the product features themselves, something we could never do from an online point of view, because that is very specific to the user's local configuration. But then the list of results related to those features is served directly out of our XML-based web services, and they bring it directly into the product UI. And then we're also, this is a iPad app that I released under a third party as a way of experimenting and piloting another possible way of approaching browsing this content. Again, where it speaks to the strategy is the iOS app was developed by an external contractor, and all of the power of the content and the search is coming from the RESTful web services that we have, the same kind of data over the wire approach. I think this cost about $6K, the last version, and we're still experimenting with this kind of approach, but what we think it has a lot of promise. So I think, I was trying to think, you know, what if I were to tell, if somebody were to ask me, what if I were trying to start this myself? One of the things I feel like was, certainly, I've run websites for Autodesk longer than I like to admit. And I certainly feel like, especially our team has shown that using open source technologies and plugging them together, if you have the right architect, is a great way to deliver some really high ROI. The other thing that's interesting about this sort of middleware approach, where you can imagine we can adapt. Actually, it was kind of well after I started this program. The support team decided to switch their knowledge base from this other CMS to Salesforce Articles. But if you imagine that kind of context, our strategy didn't change one bit. In fact, it actually helped make it clear what the ROI to this kind of investment was. The fact that we're extracting from multiple different sources anyway makes the whole strategy kind of agnostic as to source, and that the fact that we're delivering it as XML-based web services makes it a little bit agnostic of whether, you know, the web team gets reorganized and a new web team arises and builds a different portal or whatever. That sort of aggregation strategy has proven very future-proof so far at Autodesk. Fingers crossed. I think, you know, I think part of the answer to your question about convincing executives to invest in this, I certainly feel like being able to deliver with a small team and then progressively expand was certainly a key to it. You know, the fact that we were able to consistently deliver results really was within about 6 months of starting the program. We had it embedded in several of our core flagship products. And some of the pain points that they had around search and access to content prior to that made it a pretty compelling investment for a team that at that time was only 3 to 4 people. So when you hear the number 27, that includes everybody from the people that are setting the content standards and guidelines that I was talking about, all the way to development, QA, design, product managers, and myself. So I think another key part of it was that recognition that we as a company needed to really transform how we talk to customers about our offerings. And it is a little bit different perhaps from, say, a software tool like PowerPoint. Our customers spend as much as 8 hours a day, every day, for years, some of them for decades, using our software, and yet they still feel like they're mastering it. So there is a lot of complexity to it that, you know, if you were just shipping simple apps, really might not be pertinent. But there is a recognition that this is going to be important.
Where's the group sit? R&D, customer support, education?
Yes.
Where
I had, so when I started it as a search engine specifically, it was in one of the R&D divisions. It grew out of a discussion with one of the lead architects of the software as a service platform. And so initially it was sponsored through the R&D, or one of the engineering divisions, but they are also the ones that realized that they had what they were calling a learning problem. we also struggle with another overloaded term that gets tied into business community. And I think there's a lot of, very overloaded terms.
The 27 people, where is it today?
Oh, and so 2 years ago, when it really got momentum, was under our senior vice president in charge of customer support, customer service, and overall operations for the company. So she's certainly the host, but I also feel like there's also a very strong sponsorship and partnership from the senior vice president in charge of all the product engineering, as well as, turns out the current head of our marketing organization was also the original executive that helped me get the search engine started. It's a pretty strong engineering component in the company. Yeah.
Approximately how many documents does Solar Cloud index for you at this time?
Currently, well, it's between 5 and 7 million. I don't know the exact. I realize I should have looked up the exact number, but we just went through our global release. And the frequency of that indexing depends on the source. We have one source that's around 4 million, and we're indexing it typically in about 36 hours. And that indexing includes not just Solar, but pushing it through the text analytics pipeline and all of that. We were trying to do it every 24 hours, and we just stopped. So we found Solar Cloud to be really scalable, though.
And is it able to give you a sub-second response?
To the RESTful web services, absolutely. If you went through one of these UIs, you might see the online help. You would see that sub-second response. The website does a certain amount of parsing and page generation, so you'll see it be slower there. But,
Has there been any measurable reduction in support call volume?
You know, I can't say that there was with our initial go live. I have to admit, I figured that one of the things this crowd might be looking for was KPIs, and I have to admit that's a interesting challenge at the moment. Certainly, we did see the overall CSAT score for the site go up quite a bit. We've got it instrumented with 4C, and that's a challenging metric for us, period, because the main thing that customers want is a phone number, and that's not something that is something you have to kind of qualify your question before you can get to a phone number at Autodesk. But I have to admit that I can't say we saw it go down, honestly.
What do your partners think about the work that you're doing? Has this impacted their business?
Well, there was certainly a lot of worry about that because many of them actually charge our customers for support or for training. So there is something inherently sort of contradictory about that. Like, the more complicated we make it to use the software, the more money they make. But so far, anyway, it seems like the reception's been really positive. In fact, one of the people that presented at our reseller conference said the question was, how do we get content into your system? So I think there's a pretty tight relationship. They've narrowed down the number of partners over the years, and there's a pretty tight relationship, and it seems positive so far. But there's no question that there's the potential to compete with them, so to speak. Yeah.
Have you looked at any open source for result set caching?
Not yet. Send me an email. Yeah.
So what percentage of your support calls come through online compared to say phone? And has that gone up? I know you said you don't actively measure deflection, but
Yeah.
has that gone up? Just the percentage of people going online compared to calling?
Well, I know that the percentage hasn't gone up, but I would have to. Unfortunately, we as a company have trained our customers that want to contact us for support to go to this other website. That's a portal that comes up if you're and is available to our subscription members. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the traffic goes directly to that. We also have an interesting business model. It's probably for another talk that somebody else would do, where questions that get asked in our Lithium forums are escalated into Salesforce as well, depending on the nature of the question and the entitlement of the user. So there's a number of different channels, and it's kind of hard to track them because a number of them also come in through resellers. So I'm unfortunately probably not the right person.
How did you line up on like solar cloud? Did you look at commercially available software?
We did. So we actually initially had evaluated a number of different possible solutions, and we started with, well, we looked at several. We started with Velocity from a company called Vivissimo, which was bought by IBM. And what I told them eventually when we were phasing out that product was that what I realized was, what they were selling us was this, and what I ended up using was just the middle part. And so we ended up needing to, it's true that their architecture was open, so the good thing about that was we could leverage their APIs to do what we needed to do. But it meant that there was a lot of complexity to using their product that we weren't able to take advantage of. And then conversely, like our localization services team has piloted Solar Search within their team and knows the exact sort of modules they want to see for all 10 to 14 languages that they need us to support. And so we had a hard time doing that kind of multilingual implementation with the commercial engine that we were implementing. So in the end, we just found that it was actually slowing us down, to be honest. Yeah.
I was curious, you mentioned using Creative Commons to open source your own knowledge content. Did you run into technical and possibly legal issues in terms of syndicating content that you're extracting from other sources?
Well, yeah.
Outside ecosystem?
So there's a couple things. We're not, that license applies only to content that Autodesk in some way authored or was submitted through one of our community sites. To the degree that we are extracting from something like lynda.com, obviously it doesn't apply there. So
you maintain all the original branding and everything like that, or do you talk with them before you say, hey, we're looking at using content for your site and have an agreement set up to do that?
So those are terms we're negotiating through right now, but we certainly provide some attribution to the original source in those cases. And then there are a couple of other cases where we're essentially showing the entire page from an external website and then just wrapping an iframe around it. So we don't want, we certainly recognize that websites that we aren't sponsoring and paying for aren't funded by Autodesk. We certainly expect that they should be able to generate their ad revenue and so on and so forth. So in those cases, we would show the native page in some way. Okay. Wow. I actually finished faster than I thought. Great, thanks.